Hey friends, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about 5 key steps that you must have in order to elevate your event. In order to take your event from just talking at people to including them as full participants and allowing for full transformation. You're going to want to stay to the end because that 5th step allows your learning environment, allows your event to go from just lecture, just interesting, into transformative, and actually continue on after the participants leave your event. They're going to continue talking about you and continue to want to stay in business with you and bring you back as a speaker and facilitator. All right, well, let's get into it. My name is Josh Freeberg, and this is Your Event Elevated, where we believe that drinking from a fire hose is dangerous and wasteful. We think a lot of meetings, well, they really stink, and we make meetings not stink, not suck. How do we do that? Well, you've been to a conference before. The best part of any conference is what happens in the bar afterwards. And we bring the bar into the room by allowing conversations to be facilitated to elevate everyone in the room as both co-learner, co-teacher, and to create amazing conversations where everyone is full participant. Today we're going to look at an old classic training technique. It could be thousands of years old. We're not entirely sure. It's first attributed to J.H. Howitt, who was a preacher in Birmingham, Alabama. And back in 1908, he is reported to have said that he was taught by an old veteran preacher the simple way of having a killer speech or a killer training. It goes like this: tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them, and then tell them what you told them. All right? Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. This is classic. This has been taught to professional speakers all over the world. It's been attributed to Aristotle. It's been probably misattributed to Aristotle. It's been attributed to Dale Carnegie. But today we're going to build on that, and we're going to make it even better, because we believe that most of the learning doesn't happen through passive listening, right? Or through just watching. That maybe you'll get a little bit of information through to people, but more often than not, it becomes just sort of entertainment or just sort of interesting. In order for our participants, right, the people who come to our events, to really be elevated and to really get to a place of transformation, they're going to need more than just you telling them and telling them and telling them. They're going to need the opportunity to mine their own reasons for being there. And so today, as you're considering this video, I want to share with you why this might be valuable for you, right? I want to say that if you care about people understanding this heart message that you have, this sort of like thing you have to tell the world about, or this expertise that you have that could really impact people's lives, their jobs, their families, their communities, right? I mean, even as simple as like, hey, if you do this process at work the right way, you're going to have more success. If you care about getting that message through, the first thing you have to do is you have to share with people why they would want to hear what you have to say and maybe make a life change, right? They have to tap into their own internal motivation. So I'll actually start by asking you that question: is why is it important for you to change your delivery, to change your methodology for sharing with people? Right? Why is that important to you? Because it's hard to change. It's easy to stay. By the way, I know that most people say their biggest fear is public speaking, but one of the easiest things to do once you get over that fear is to stand up and give a lecture. It's super easy. It's super easy because you maintain all the control, you control all the variables. You do away with that fear that you have. And what I'm going to be inviting you to do is pretty scary, scarier than public speaking, which is giving control to your audience. So let me share with you, now that you've had a little time to think about why it's important for you to watch this video today, and remember to watch through to the end, because that actually is going to be one of the key things that cements this learning. But the first piece is what I just did with you, which is to tell them why the activity that we're about to go into is going to be potentially transformative for them. And here's a simple way to do that. And this process is called enrollment. So we're enrolling them into the activity. And so let's say we're going to go into an activity here in a few minutes that's just a simple connection conversation with two other people, right? And we're going to say, hey, in a few minutes, we're going to have a conversation around a question I'm going to share with you in a minute. And you're going to be in groups of 3 with a couple other people and have an opportunity both to speak, what's important to you, as well as to hear what's important to others. And what we know is that when we connect heart-to-heart level with someone, voice-to-voice with someone, mind to mind with someone else, it allows us, one, to be fully present to what's possible in the room, right? So I'm giving them a reason. I could tell that, like, that's a simple thing to say. Oh, wow, this is why this is important. So often our audience members are kind of in a arms crossed posture, sitting back saying, why should I do this? Like, I don't know. I'm not bought in. But if we begin by enrolling people into why we're about to do what we're going to do, it's not just that it's a gimmick. It's not just that it's for funsies, but it's actually something that we believe is impactful and will open us up to learning and to actually being changed. And so the first step is tell them why we're doing what we're doing. And that step's called enrollment. Step number 2, I call this tell them what. So it's tell them why, tell them what. The second thing, and this is called instruction, is we're going to tell them what we're going to do. Now I want to pause here for a second. This is so critical. One of the things that often goes wrong, and the reason a lot of like speakers or presenters, lecturers are afraid to let go of control, is because they've tried something and it didn't work. And this step is often the reason that it didn't work, is the instruction. And so let's go back to our activity that I shared a second ago. Hey, in a few minutes, we're going to get into groups of 3 and we're going to discuss a question. Where it goes wrong is we just say, okay, we'll get in groups of 3 and talk about this. Well, we haven't given clear enough boundaries to it. We haven't given really clear instruction. And when adults feel incompetent, if they feel unclear on what to do, they withdraw, right? You may physically see them get up and leave the room, right? If 20% of your room leaves after you give instructions for an activity, you got to look at your instructions more clearly. People didn't know what to do. We're going to be inviting them into being more vulnerable. We're going to be inviting them into doing something that's difficult from like an emotional level, from a social level. So we need to give super clear instructions so they know exactly what to do. And you'll see this in our instructions. Like, they are very precise. And often I will give instructions 3 times, 4 times. I'll give it visually. I'll give it audibly. If possible, I'll find a way to give it kinesthetically, right? And we can do that a couple different ways by actually like building a graphic that demonstrates it, or drawing it out, or even physically having people stand up and model it. Even if we're watching others do things kinesthetically, those kinesthetic learners will capture that. Our second step is tell them what we're going to do and give super clear instructions. If you think you've said it too many times, do it one more time. Like, seriously, we can't be too clear on the instructions. I had a participant at one of our events, and he says, when you started, I kind of thought, man, this guy talks to me like a kindergartner. And he was ever so slightly offended. And he said, but then I realized, like, oh yeah, like I was sort of half checked out the first time he went through the instructions. And that second time I caught it. The second time I got it. I was so glad the graphic was up there that had the cartoon figures of how the activity was going to be done. Give super precise, super clear instructions so that everyone can understand the activity. Step 1 was enroll. Step 2 is instruction. Step 3 is the activity itself. the activity itself. And as you think through the activities that you're going to be inviting people into, begin always, whenever we move from going from like a presentation to an experience, right? When we go from like a keynote to an experiential keynote, when we go from a lecture to a workshop, whatever that might look like, we want to begin by asking, what is the conversation that we want to have? Not necessarily what's the content. What is the conversation that we want to have? And an interesting part of that is to say, who do we want in that conversation? Who do we want in that conversation? And as you think through your event, one of the things to think about is, how do I involve more stakeholders, right? How do I involve not just maybe the host and the audience, right? The intended audience for this event. But what about all of our presenters and speakers and subject matter experts? What about some of the like auxiliary industries that are connected to our intended audience, right? Would those, by the way, also be additional good audience members to have in here? It might not be the primary people, but it might be some of the important people that are involved in the process. As an example, I'm doing an event with financial planners, and they used to do this event. It was just sort of the head financial planner of each agency. And then they said, well, what about bringing team members in? What about bringing some of our different supporting vendors in and actually having them be part of the conversation as well? And then here's one that gets missed, and it's a big opportunity as you're putting your event together, is sponsors, right? We're going to do a deep dive on that at some point, but involving your sponsors as full participants to your event can absolutely transform your sponsor relationship. So we've done 3 steps so far. We've enrolled people by telling them why we're going to do what we're going to do. We've then given them instructions by telling them what we're going to do. The next step is we do it. We do it. And now here's where it shifts. And this is so fun. The next thing we do is we ask them. Right? That old standard was tell them, tell them, tell them. And we're going to do tell them, do it, ask them. Ask them what happened. Right? So we are going to, we have a piece of learning that we're doing an active learning cycle on. We have a question that we're deliberating, whatever that might be. Next step is ask the audience. Ask what their learning was. This happens so often. We will have somebody get up and they'll teach, right? And they'll teach for 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And then we'll move into an active learning cycle where we ask the audience, like, what did you learn? What was a key learning that you had in these, this last 20 minutes? And it's so funny how often people will stand up and give, oh, you know what I learned? And they'll say something. And you're just like, wow, that's a brilliant learning. You'll see people writing it down. And then you go to the presenter, the actual speaker, and say, you never said that, did you? Right? There is such a gap between what we say and what gets heard. But for whatever reason, people often hear what they need to hear. And if they're given the opportunity to give it voice and to ruminate on it and to share it back and forth with others, well, guess what? That learning that they needed to have that day is going to be so valuable and so important. Here's another thing that happens. Our speaker shared for 20 minutes. It was brilliant. It was great stuff. They're a subject matter expert, right? But then we put people into groups and allowed them to share back and forth. And somebody says, hey, what was shared from the stage was great, but boy, the biggest thing I got today was when I was talking to my neighbor and they shared with me a best practice that they have. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. Or this person shared something that's been important for them and what they've learned in the last few months. And oh my gosh, that's the whole reason I came this weekend, was for that conversation. Ask them what they got out of the activity. That's our 4th step. And we call this the debrief, right? It sometimes gets called the report out. But we're going to call this the debrief. This is where we ask our participants what learning they had. This allows them, by the way, when they share their learning, to become a teacher in the room, right? If we have 1,000 people in our room, we have 1,000 teachers, not just one. We don't have 1,000 learners and one teacher. We actually have 1,001 learners and teachers. The other thing that is so cool about this is when our people get up, they grab the microphone and they share for 30 seconds, for 45 seconds, and they give a quick teaching about what they experienced, what they learned. Well, there's this old saying, it goes like this: when one person teaches, two people learn. If you want to learn something at a high level, teach it to others. And we're giving people an opportunity to have that first draft of teaching when they do this debrief and they report out on what they learned during this activity. All right. That leads us to our fourth step. And I promised you this fifth step was going to be the one that I don't even know best how to describe it, right? It is exponential learning. It allows this whole thing to like just get jet fuel poured on it, right? And it is this. Ask them why. Right? We started with tell them why. We next went to tell them what. We said do the activity. Next, we're going to ask them what they learned. Now we're going to ask them why. And this is called a meta debrief. At the beginning, we said, hey, here's why you might want to learn this. In a meta debrief, we pause. We allow them to elevate above the event, above the conversation we just had, above the activity we just had, and say, what can you notice was just made possible in this event? What can you notice? We just spent, we had 20 minutes from a speaker. Then I shared with you why we were going to do an activity. I told you what the activity was. You had a 6-minute conversation with 2 other people. We had some great learnings that came out of this. You heard from Bill, Julie, et cetera, et cetera. What can you notice about how we learned in the last 40 minutes? What can you notice about what happened in you when you went from passive learner to active conversation partner with your neighbor? What can you notice what happened when we heard from 5 or 6 or 7 people about what happened here this last hour? What can you notice about that? What's so amazing is that we often don't know why we just had a moment of change, right? So we go, oh my gosh, that was amazing. And that's going to change my life. Oh, that was amazing. And that's going to change how I show up. That's going to change how I do this activity. That's going to change how I handle my tasks or do my time management, whatever it is, right? It's going to change my relationships with my coworkers. We have these moments, these eureka moments, these moments of insight where it's like, wow, something amazing happened. But because we don't pause and say, why did that happen? We don't have access to it ever again. It was sort of like, I don't know, it was just magic. It was just a miracle. It was just a set of circumstances that I don't know anything about, right? And so then we go around hunting for that feeling again, not realizing that, at least in the way we do events, that moment was curated. It was crafted. It was designed. And when you actually, like the magician, pull back the curtain and say, this is how the magic trick is done, guess what? You just trained everybody else how to be a magician in their own life, right? This is where the learning absolutely blows up, and where people are going to say, what was crazy is I learned this new thing. I then immediately tapped into my motivation for learning it, why it would be important for me to apply it. I had a conversation with a trusted friend and then got their additional edits and insight into it. And then I was able to speak what I was going to do next, and I now feel accountable to actually take action on it, right? All of these things are what comes out of the meta debrief, and it absolutely blows up the learning, right? It absolutely elevates the possibility for our participants to leave our event not just like transformed, but transforming, right? Not just like, changed, but able to continually change, right? They have access now to tools and abilities that they didn't have before. This last step is called the meta debrief. It's one of the most underutilized, and honestly, like, it does feel like magic when you do it. It does feel like almost like a miracle when people do this. I discovered this really the hard way. I was doing an event and I got lost. Like, literally, I couldn't find the clicker to advance the slide deck. I didn't know where my agenda was. I had moved across the room and then I couldn't find anything and I was lost. I had to stall for time. And here's what I did. I said, hey, everybody, we just spent 45 minutes in a paired interview. What can you notice? Like, so several of you described some really meaningful moments. What can you notice about those meaningful moments that we all created in this room in the last 45 minutes? I was stalling. And then I walked over and I'm looking for my agenda and I'm kind of waiting because the room had gone weirdly silent. I thought maybe I'd screwed up the question. And all of a sudden somebody raised their hand and they said, I'm not alone. I'm like, what? And they go, I just realized, like, I spend most of my life as a solopreneur. I feel totally alone. And I felt actually connected to somebody. Somebody else said, I didn't realize how close you could get to somebody and how much you could learn about another person in just 3 questions. Right? Somebody else said, this person was a stranger and became a friend in just 25 minutes. Right? Over and over again, we got these amazing things. And because they come from our audience and not from the up on high, right? The audience is more likely to buy into it, more likely to believe it, and more likely to be able to go out and use it in the future. So these are our 5 steps. Tell them why, tell them what, do it, ask them what, ask them why. They call these steps enrollment, instruction, activity, debrief, and meta debrief. If you're looking to elevate your event, right? To have your event elevated to levels you've never thought possible, to shift from talking at people to talking with people, to invite our audiences to be elevated up to the same plane that we are, stick around. Subscribe to our channel, listen to our podcast, and listen up for some upcoming workshops and virtual experiences where you can learn how to do this yourself. In the meantime, give it a try. Do a learning activity where you invite people fully in by telling them why you're about to do what you're going to do, tell them what you're going to do it, ask them what happened for you, and ask them why it worked. When you trust your audiences that they are smart people who are teachers and learners, who are sages and people of wisdom, you will be shocked at the level of learning that is possible and how much your event is elevated.